pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First order of business is the approval of minutes as provided by Clerk Karen from last meeting.
Amy just passed it out. Just marked up version.
You can look at mine.
Oh, it's this, is it the same as what we
Yes.
got?
Yeah, these are edits as of this afternoon. So. Okay, all right, great.
Somebody stole mine. Joan, did you get my copy?
I've been
Sorry,
watching.
I'm misbehaving.
Any comments or edits to the minutes? All right, we look for a motion to accept the minutes.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Perl and seconded by Mr. Peterson. How's that?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right. Next up is the Finance Director's report. Amy.
So just a few quick things. Since the last time we met, we received an additional donation from Garrity Asphalt, in the amount of $5,000 for the Social Services Department. Under the Education Cost Sharing Grant, we received some revised estimates from the state. So we had a slight reduction of about $39,000. Our original estimate was about $6,039,516, and now we're expected to get $5,999,774. So this still exceeds our budgetary estimates by $597,000, so overall not bad. Under the tax sale, Simsbury is going to hold its first tax sale since the adoption of the tax sale policy back in July. There's about $599,000 in outstanding property tax collections, and this is expected to be held on May 18th. We've actually already seen some progress in this area. Before we implemented the policy, there was about 30 properties that were eligible for tax sale. We're down to 20, and we've collected about $300,000.
Do we have any estimate of what the appraised value of the houses or the properties for sale are? Well, just wondering if
I
we
might
have
have
a
it.
realistic chance to actually hold a sale and clear that balance.
Is it auction?
So we
So what we'll typically find is that in those situations, particularly the homes that usually are occupied, that by the time it gets to an actual tax sale, that very rarely will we have somebody who's actually living in the home. So at this point, we were down to 4 houses that had folks actually living in them. 2 of those folks have reached out and established payment plans, which is great. And so at this point, we still have potentially 2 properties that would be moving forward on the tax sale that actually have folks residing in the homes. Of course, the hope is that we'll be able to work with them and that wouldn't happen. So that the majority of the properties would be vacant land or commercial properties or folks that are actually residing in the home.
But no estimate of the, okay, all right,
value.
fine. All right, thank you, sorry to interrupt.
That's good news.
And then the final item, the tax abatement for volunteer firefighters and ambulance personnel. We received a request, which is in the communication section of your packet from Kevin at the fire district, asking us to reopen this ordinance. I guess the last time the ordinance was updated, there was an error where the last paragraph was deleted. This paragraph had stated that the volunteers that served a minimum of 25 years would receive a $1,000 tax abatement. So they are going to specifically review this section and do a more general review for any possible updates. The total value from the 2017 grand list is about $62,000 for these abatements. The Board of Selectmen established a work group, and they're expected to meet in the spring.
Okay, so I always want to know when people say we think it was just an oversight, who was involved and whether it was, do we talk to somebody on the other side to make sure that it wasn't intentional?
I don't recall it being intentional.
Okay. Who was on?
I think I was.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, that's good enough for me. I mean, but it's always sort of good to hear both sides. All right,
Yeah, Maria just said that Sean Askham had assisted as well.
okay.
Yes.
All right. Okay. So do we need to take action on this today? Okay.
Just a heads up that it's coming down the pike.
Yep. All right, so then, moving smartly through the agenda. Burke?
Doing a good job, Joan.
can spread my papers out. That would work well. Okay, so the first section, in terms of grant and revenue updates, we did get our first excess cost notification, but the way that process works is there's a second and final filing in March. So the state puts caps on the amount of excess costs, and it generally is in the mid 70% range, and that's what we have seen in this initial notification, but we won't know until after our March filing whether or not they will reduce it, change it, and that's the same process each and every year. So that's what always makes it very difficult to project kind of where we're in the current year and where we will end up based on excess cost. The IDEA grants, we did get our new award there. That's up slightly. We're still waiting to hear on a couple final state and federal grant awards. I think Chef is one of the last ones that we're waiting to hear on. And we ultimately are all waiting to see tomorrow about the governor's budget, and that being the sort of kickoff to the revenues for next year for our budgeting process. Moving on to the expenditures, you see that overall within our major groups, the bottom line spending is a very similar pace to the prior year in the second quarter. It's just slightly slower by about 0.17%. Turning to the discussion of some of those items, I'm going to skip over. The enrollment and staffing has not changed since the first quarter, so there's nothing new there. Just looking at this overall pace and where we would still project to be roughly break even for the end of this current year. In the first quarter report, we highlighted for you what some of the staffing changes were in the instructional area, so that first part of that update is not new. What we have done is been able to adjust our instruction group budget by $200,000 and decrease the insurance and pension number by that same amount to be able to more accurately reflect spending in both of those two areas. And I've spent a lot of time for this update highlighting what has been a really difficult year for utilities and the operation of plant. We've had regional pricing with a joint group of towns where normally we're able to lock in pricing in August and usually know beforehand. This year it didn't get locked in until after the term technically would have started. It didn't get locked in until October and just didn't do as well as the group had hoped. We actually know our pricing for 1920, and that's better, but we have to get through this year at these fixed prices, which were somewhat higher for diesel and gasoline and number two fuel. And the biggest surprise that I had was we had a fixed contract with an electricity supplier that was supposed to be good through December of 2020, which under provisions of their contract with some overall changes in the industry, they were able to renege on that contract. But working with Tom Roy and Maria, we were able to do a new fixed pricing cooperatively with the town, unfortunately a little bit higher rate of the kilowatt hours. So we're keeping a close eye on that. The last page shows year over year energy data, and we're trying to monitor, that's through 6 months, we're trying to get our last bills for the first 7 months of this fiscal year to kind of see where we may end up, monitoring that very closely. And the out-of-district tuition is sort of the last category to highlight. Timing-wise, we were spending more slowly, but we actually have more known contracts encumbered, so it's really more of a timing issue. And as I mentioned earlier, it really relates to our excess costs grant from the state. We just can't project where we will end up until we get that final excess cost award and notification sometime in later this spring, because March 1st is when all the districts have to have their final submission date for this fiscal year, and then they'll let us know what funds are available to give us our final amounts. So those are my highlights. Any particular questions?
Just a couple for me, and then I'll open it up. What's IEP for several new students?
IEP is an
Education plan.
individual educational
Plan.
Program.
program. I was
Plan,
going to say placement. I knew that was wrong. Program. So that's really what drives the service requirements for an individual student who's been identified with special needs.
Okay, thank you. And the $200,000 that you moved from insurance and pension over to instruction, is that reflected in the first page, Mark?
Yes. So the revised budget column indicates that's net of that movement.
Okay. And then my last question is sort of just a general one as we look out. I can't really tell from the spreadsheet on the energy costs, but do we ever do an analysis on the relative costs of utilities and, on a per student, per location basis? I guess what I'm asking is are any of the schools more efficient or less efficient relative to,
Well, I think
in a material way?
I think the short answer to that is we have not studied building by building, but I know that our facilities master plan that has started out, that's one of the things that Tecton
Okay.
is, and the consulting engineers that are part of that are supposed to give recommendations on fuel
Okay,
efficiency.
great.
So I think we'll get essentially the answer to your question.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else?
I have a general question, and it may be more for Amy, although what you said made me think of it. With the governor's budget due to come out soon, and won't be able to wait until next month to hear the answers. I know what's been in the newspaper has been that he's talking about making changes to our car tax once again, and maybe taking that away and supposedly replacing it with enhancements to pilot. And so my question is about pilot. And I know we get some pilot money for some things, but, are we in line at all for, I don't know if it's on open space at all, because he talked about that, but I'm not sure. So if you have any general comments about that, that'd be helpful.
Well, I guess
I know
like-
it's premature.
I know, I can kind of give you the history. So ironically, our pilot money has only been a couple grand every year.
Yeah, it's
But
tiny.
this year, we actually received 35,000. I'm not sure where that came from or how come. I talked to our assessor, David, and he's not sure either. He used to be able to follow the formula, like down to it, and predict what we're going to get. But since the state's changed that, he can't do that any longer. So honestly, your guess is as good as mine.
There you have it.
Yep.
Okay.
Lisa?
Just two questions. One is for Burke. Burke, the governor has talked about reducing bonding significantly. Are we anticipating any problem with the Henry James grant?
I am not, based on the most recent notification that we received, which was our authorization to go out to bid. It really is kind of the lock-in that we are grant eligible. I can't speak to the timing of whether or not this project is on a list that hasn't been voted. I will have to follow up on that, but I know that it would be future projects that would be impacted potentially, as I understand it. Not those that have already been approved with a grant.
Excellent. And then the second question, I guess, is for the three of you. As we start getting in information from your various lobbying and information groups, if you could please forward costs, CCM, the finance board, to our board,
Right.
so that we can have it in time to look at. And in case the chair wants to call a meeting earlier,
Yes,
depending on what happens.
right.
And if I may just go back to the point about pilot, I think the governor and folks up there, having been there myself, are all focused on trying to give the cities more money. And everybody, even when Luke Bronin came here a couple of years ago, it was all about how, we have all of this untaxable property in Hartford, a third to a half of our property is untaxable. My reaction is, yeah, so is ours. I mean, a third of our property is open space. It's not taxable. And we don't get pilot for it, from what I'm hearing you say. At least they get pilot. So when we're lobbying through cost and through our representative and senator, we need to really make them understand the point that we too have a big burden of untaxable property. And, wouldn't mind having something come back for that if they're going to take away our car tax revenue.
And you're talking specifically about open space or
Well, that's what,
public-owned
that's,
buildings?
I mean, we have that as well.
Hartford's buying up a lot of their own property, which I think is probably the main issue there, right? They own a lot of their own.
Well, no, a lot of their untaxable property is because of state government buildings and
Right.
hospitals
Yeah,
and the like,
exactly.
as well as their own parks and that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. But we too, I mean, when you look at the footprint of the city versus the footprint of our
Yeah.
town, we too have a large percentage of our property is not taxable.
Although ours is by choice.
Open space they take into account.
One-
I know the
one could
pilot for the
argue
other
certain
communities,
people's
truly
choices.
state-owned
Certain people's not.
property has gone down over the years. So I don't know if they're trying to restore some of that funding to actual state-owned property, or if they would expand it to open space. I
Yeah.
guess we'll find out.
All right.
Just a question for Burke. You normally send out a survey for anticipated students coming into the schools. Has that been completed or the results tallied? And is there any change going from this year's kindergarten to next year's kindergarten?
I know that the annual survey process happened. I did not hear that there was a noticeable trend, but I will need to update all of you. I'll get that information tomorrow and
Okay.
update all of you.
And then I'm assuming then, were the 3 additional classroom teachers spread across all schools, or was it primarily Latimer Lane, or was it another school?
It was, I believe it was Tooten and Central, is what my recollection is. There was at least 2 schools that had surprise number of students, so that it just went over class size guidelines. I think it was Central and Tooten, possibly Squadron.
Okay, and how many, for the IEPs, is it several? What is several? Is that 2, 4?
This was really just an FYI that we had new information.
And I know they can
And
be
it could,
costly.
yeah, and it could,
so-
just to make sure that if I have not heard over the last 3 weeks I meet weekly with the director of special education, or assistant superintendent, and have not heard that there's been any placement or any,
Okay.
special one-to-one or anything needed. It's just always difficult when you get these new students. They come with IEPs, and you just don't know when it's mid-year whether or not there'll be some impacts.
All right, thank you,
I think so far we're looking okay.
thank you.
Or anyone else? All right, thank you, Burke. We appreciate that. Next up is the proposed CNR structure discussion. Amy has updated the agenda item submission form, and we have made some edits in an attempt to match the policy now with all of the discussion that we've had. I think we're nearing a point where we should be ready to approve this policy. I would say there've been a couple of developments that, since we last met, do we want to let's walk through. So,
CNR structure discussion is a little bit different than the CNR fund policy.
Okay, all right.
So you want to do them?
You do them the way you'd like to do them.
Okay. So I think we should talk about the structure discussion, because then it just leads into the changes that
Okay.
happened into the CNR, in the capital and CNR policy. So, first of all, in the agenda item submission, was that confusing to anybody, or was it spelled out pretty clearly as to what happened and what was found and what we're proposing?
Ask your question again?
In the agenda item submission, was it clear enough?
Did you understand?
Yeah, was it clear enough to dictate what was found, what I came to determine, and what I'd like to change? Or do you want me to just do a brief run through?
Let's walk
Yeah,
through it.
well,
Let's
okay.
walk through it, all right?
Okay.
I focused on the policy itself,
Yeah,
not on
that's
the,
okay, that's
not on
okay.
the submission, sorry.
So on the CNR fund, when we were going through the audit documents, I found this fund, it's called CNR Assessor. And there's about $1.9 million sitting in this fund. So the CNR Assessor Fund is supposed to be used for every 5-year revaluations done by the assessment department. And so those valuations are typically anywhere from like $300,000 to $500,000. So I'm like, oh my goodness, why do we have all this money? So I checked with the assistant finance director. She wasn't sure. I looked at the activity in the fund, and there's been no activity in and out of this fund since 2007, other than related to the assessments. So this 1.9 million has just been sitting there. I checked with previous finance directors, and finally that led me back to Kevin Kane, who was able to tell me that this money was there to keep the CNR fund solvent. So as you know, we have a 5-year chargeback for the CNR. We have 2 years to use the money, but we only pay for it over 5 years. So that 2 years that we have to use the money, the negative is always in the the cash is always in the negative, which is what I was referring to as the internal debt in our prior discussions. So this money was used because we're funding CNR about $1 million a year, a little bit under. So this money was there so that we have positive cash flows and we're not having that negative cash, which makes perfect sense, fabulous. So we no longer have that internal debt that I was talking about. So since this money has been like commingled with the CNR, it's kind of been like lost and forgotten. So I'd really like to move it out of this CNR assessor fund and put it into just a fund called CNR.
Yeah.
And then going forward, all the CNR projects would go into the same fund, and all of the CNR would be kept together, and it would show its positive cash balance. The way that we're doing it right now is that every time we appropriate for CNR, every year we're creating a new fund. So we have like 5 funds open right now for CNR. So this would eliminate that. It would eliminate the negative cash in those funds and just bring everything together.
So this is similar what we, on some of the capital projects, where we're going to put them into a single fund, keep line items by year, of course, and keep track by year. We're going to still do the 5-year budgeting against that. The money has always been there, but it's now going to be combined in a single fund.
Correct.
So this makes sense.
Because the idea was it's a debt against yourself, and it required the foresight to pre-fund it, which the town had done.
Right.
And when we decided, the state statutes permit putting aside for the assessor, so I imagine what happened is they just commingled the funds, thinking it's easier than creating another 8 of the 800 funds we have. So that's probably,
Yes.
So the action regarding the structure is to combine all of the CNR funds that are by year and the CNR assessor fund into a single fund. So that's the first step.
But have a separate one for the assessor?
No.
No, okay.
The funds from the assessor fund will be collapsed into the CNR fund.
which I
It'll
think
all
by
be
state
one fund.
statute.
It'll have positive fund
need to
balance,
be, right.
and everything else will function the way it's functioned before.
Right.
So it's not a use of the general fund, because
Yeah.
it was
It-
pre-funded.
The money was always in the consolidated
Yeah, I understand.
balance sheet, if you will. All right, so then separately, we'll look at the policy as it relates to, was the 5-year, where was the edit about?
Yeah, I'll run through that.
That's in the policy itself?
in the
Okay,
policy, yes.
all right. So that's the structure, so I would look for a motion to approve the establishment of the CNR fund that will receive the funds from the CNR Assessor Fund and consolidate the existing CNR funds.
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Schofield,
Second.
seconded by Ms. Wertheimer. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, great. So then the second topic is the actual
Actual
policy
policy.
itself,
Yes.
the capital and CNR policy.
So there was a few things that were added to this. It went before the Board of Selectmen at their, I believe it was 2 meetings ago. They reviewed the policy, they provided their input, and then based on the discussion that we just had, I made a few minor changes to this policy. So I'll just run through quickly what the changes are. Under the definitions and guidelines, we added the language per the charter that the Planning Commission must review and approve the capital plan annually for consistency with the Plan of Conservation and Development. And then under the capital and CNR fund policy, if you flip it over, I added the language about using the 5-year chargeback method. And then under that, I included a little, just one line stating that the CNR fund will hold the reserve to make sure that the CNR fund is solvent and we have an overall positive balance within CNR. And then lastly, under the capital reserve fund policy, I edited Lisa's language slightly to include the Board of Selectmen as part of the emergency, the use of the emergency funds. And that was it.
And then one other thing, which is that although we're using a 5-year payback in the sentence, the
Oh, yes.
paragraph, we say that will not be financed over a period will not exceed their life cycle. So if we had something that qualified for CNR that was a 3-year asset, we would put it into the budget.
So I do have a question on that one section and then 2 little typos. And that is that, I'm not advocating this, but we have in the past, after great controversy, put some studies into CNR. And that's been controversial. I'm not taking a stand one way or another of whether we should or should not, but it's been kind of the only way that it got done in some cases. And so if a study is a study and it's only 1 year and it has to be paid off in 1 year, I'm just wondering, does that make sense? Or is in essence, is this preventing us from ever having that ability, which may be something everybody wants to prevent? I just want to highlight it, that,
Well, at the bottom of the second page, we describe capital items and studies of single or aggregate
Right.
cost
yeah.
that exceed 10,000 but are
Yeah.
less than 250.
But it has to be paid back in, if the a study's lifetime is usually only a year or so. I'm just wondering if that's
Well, that might
bit
be a
of
good
conflict.
example of something that might be a 3-year asset, for instance, or, well, I mean, so,
How do you define the
Say
duration of an
the-
asset when it's a
Say the
study?
study was like $25,000, so we fund $83,250 into the CNR as part of the 5 years. So the first year of funding, that $83,250, we would basically allocate to the study. So $25,000 of that would pay off the study in
Okay.
full.
As long as you're telling me it doesn't prohibit it, then I'm
No.
fine. Okay. 2 little tiny typos. One, well, this may not be a typo, but it's just a wording thing at the very top of the page, above that paragraph we were just talking about. Talks about the non-recurring fund will include fleet purchases. I think you want it to say may, because some fleet purchases are done in other ways. And you don't want to restrict yourself. And then down at the bottom of that page, well, almost the bottom, the fifth from the bottom line that starts with the word circumstance, requiring, the next word should be not and. So
Correct.
tiny little thing.
correct.
Otherwise, I'm
Good
fine.
catch.
I'm confused as to
Where?
where you are. What number, what?
It's on, yeah, just show Lori, it's fast.
Can you repeat that, Linda? Circumstance?
Page 3,
Yeah, it's just a typo.
5th line from the bottom.
Thank you.
Okay, so any other questions or comments?
One that's not really on the policy, but just, we do have an existing policy that we need to do something to repeal it? And so that we replace it with this.
So there's.
We don't need to repeal the old one?
I don't think so, because it's basically, part of that policy is included in this one, so even though It's written as a new policy. It has the same structure as the old one, so it's just an update.
As of date certain, right?
I just have one minor question on the title. Since we're doing the debt management policy, is this the right title for this? Working on the two policies, does that make sense?
Oh, capital.
This
Yeah.
right here?
Yeah, just.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah, so why isn't it called the capital
And
and
non-recurring.
Non-recurring.
CNR policy?
Yeah,
Yeah,
So we added financing because it talks about what can be used in the fund, and actually more so now because we included the 5-year the chargeback, but we can change it to capital non-recurring.
I would
I
do, you
would.
can do on financing in capital non-recurring, because we're doing financing in debt in the other one, if you want.
Yeah, so I actually think our resolution should say that we adopt this, or the revisions to the proposed capital.
Call it
I
the
just,
same thing.
I feel like we need to get rid of the old policy.
Yeah, I do too.
Conflicting
No, I agree
policies.
with you. I think we should, that this.
This
that
wholly
this becomes the
replaces.
effective capital and CNR policy as of today, replacing previous policies.
Right.
Full stop,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, I think the last one was as of,
It could have been very
as of
confusing.
January 2003, maybe?
It could have been very confusing if it had a different
Yeah,
name.
right.
That's true.
So, but I
And
think
we're
we want.
including now financing policy in it?
What's that?
Well, it used to be called capital and non-recurring fund policy.
Yeah, see, now we're including financing policy in the new
We're gonna change the
document.
name. We're gonna change the name back to, we're gonna call it
What
the
it was.
capital and
Fine,
capital
I'm okay then.
non-recurring policy.
That's fine.
All right, so I'm going to write the resolution and then ask somebody to, are there any other questions or comments on what we reduced the reserve from 200 to 50. We described what happens in an emergency. I think it's plenty adequate to try to make things happen in real time, but not relinquish the authority to get it done, all right? So, let's see. To adopt the replacement, I'll read this in just a minute. Hang on. Capital, and we're going to spell it out, capital non-recurring, right?
Capital and non-recurring
Capital and
fund,
non-recurring,
fund policy.
okay. And then just say replacing the existing, and what was it called
Same thing.
exactly?
Yep.
Capital non-recurring fund
And it was
policy.
January 2003. I don't think we ever, we talked about it a lot, but I don't think we ever adopted a subsequent one.
And is the capital asset policy something different?
Yes,
That's next,
yes.
okay. All right, who wants to read the motion? Derek?
I think I can read that.
I don't need to volunteer you to make the motion, but
Move effective.
Yeah. the capital and non-recurring fund, you have to say that out.
Yeah.
Replacing the existing capital and non-recurring fund.
So I move that effective February 19th, 2019, to adopt the replacement capital and CNR policy. I'm sorry, the capital and non-recurring fund,
Policy.
replacing the
Yeah.
existing capital and non-recurring fund policy.
So moved by Mr. Peterson,
Second.
seconded by Ms. Schofield. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? All right, so moved.
Thank you for your work on this.
You're
It
welcome.
was good. It was a collaborative effort. And I appreciate everybody's input.
Who was the second by? I'm sorry.
Ms. Schofield?
Let's go.
Yeah, yeah. So then we need to discuss the capital asset policy?
Yeah, so there's a small change to this. So now that you just approved the capital and non-recurring policy,
Oh, I got that.
under the definitions and guidelines, it says that A capital project is defined as any project resulting in or contributing to the acquisition of or addition to a capital asset with an anticipated cost equal to or exceeding $10,000 for equipment purchases. The current capital asset policy has that set at $5,000. So we just have to make sure that the policies are in line and match. So all we're doing on the capital asset policy is changing the equipment capital asset threshold from $5,000 to $10,000. And then we are changing the life of the vehicles. It's currently at 7 to 15 years, and we updated it to 3 to 15 years, since the police vehicles are only in use for a period of 3 years. And those are the only changes.
Okay, any
Yeah.
questions on this?
No
This
problem.
seems good. This is kind of cleanup that is
Yeah.
very helpful. So I need a motion to the effective February 19th, 2019, to adopt the revision to the proposed, the proposed revision to the capital asset policy as presented.
Yeah, so moved.
Moved by Ms. Schofield,
Second.
seconded by Ms. Wertheimer. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Okay. Moving on, next up is the Retirement Subcommittee. I guess I'll start with this and then ask others to chime in. We discussed this a little over the last couple of meetings, and I think appropriately so, we went back to the source of our authority and responsibility and addressed these questions to the town council as well. And he has confirmed that under the charter, that the responsibility for the decisions made relative to the pension and benefits subcommittee are the responsibility of the Board of Finance. And so as such, we really do not have the authority to delegate that decision-making power to the subcommittee. I think further, it's important to remember that one of the primary functions of the subcommittee is to communicate between the three boards decisions relative to those pensions and benefits, because the employees are the employees of the Board of Finance and, of the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Ed. And so the structure of the board with representatives from each of our three boards and 2 members at large is to be a dedicated group to listen and to the advice of our financial advisor, as we will also, as a Board of Finance, to be familiar with the topics of that committee, and to communicate among our boards from the representatives at the committee, and then to make recommendations based on their experience and knowledge about that topic that will ultimately be the decisions and responsibilities of the Board of Finance. And so what everyone, what Bob DiCrescenzo and Maria and others thought would be great is if we could put down in writing all of that to match what we think has been somewhat consistent. I think that we never really shirked our responsibility as the Board of Finance, but I think there was some ambiguity about what authority actually had been delegated or resided at that committee, and I think this is a good, very good attempt to correct that. Again, I'll thank Lisa, who has spent some time looking at these and trying to make sure that the language matches the charter and a practice that will help us retain our responsibility and authority, and yet recognize the good work of the people who are on that subcommittee, who get up at 7:15 in the morning, and have a consistency, which I think is really important, so that I don't view it as maybe, as I said at one point, that this is not a duplication necessarily of work, because a good deal of the synthesis of the information and discussion will happen at the subcommittee, but the decisions will be reported to us, and we will take the action. So that's what this memorandum of understanding is designed to do. Lisa, do you want to just, I apologize, There were some edits made, today that Lisa made, and I think if you've had a chance to look at them, I think
I'm
they're all
sure
helpful.
you may not, sorry. So what I tried to do is take the language of the charter and replace some of the words that were in there based on councils. So I think, I put supervision and maintenance because that's actually what the charter said. Prudent investment is what the charter said. So I tried to use the language. And then whereas the Board of Finance to consult with and receive feedback from the Board of Selectmen and Board of Education, because that's what the charter says, we're required to consult. So that's there. Some are just spelling. We did subcommittee as one word and sometimes capital, so I tried to change the spelling consistently. And then to establish the retirement committee as the means to consult with the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education in accordance with the Charter, Section 808, again referring it to, back to the charter language. In terms of membership, I did want to highlight, it says the Board of Finance hereby establishes the retirement subcommittee, because it is technically a subcommittee of the Board of Finance, because we hold the fiduciary duty. And there was an inconsistency there, because it showed two community members at large who are electors of the town appointed by the Board of Selectmen. So that was just a point of discussion that I wanted to highlight. I do want to take a moment to thank Phil Schultz and Paul McElhaney, who are two of my favorite people in town. And once they resign from serving in public service, I will personally nominate them as hometown heroes, because they work so hard and get no thanks, no appreciation, and they are just excellent. So it's not about them at all. It's just a matter of if it's our subcommittee, who should be appointing it. So that's a point of discussion. Then, as we go down, I changed the quorum. A legal quorum is 5 for 8, so it can't be a 4. And Linda pointed that out to me, so thank you for that. And then I added with at least one member president voting from each board. So if they make a recommendation and it's required to consult, Rob mentioned that that was important to him, that at least one member of each board. Because you don't want the Board of Finance and the Board of Education recommending something that no member of the Board of Selectmen saw
Yeah.
or had an opportunity to speak to. And then I know that Kevin and I were inclined to 4 times a year, and I know some members were 1, so I settled on a biannual presentation of our investment person, if that works for the
This is the
board.
Hebner Compromise.
Yes, it was the Hefner Compromise. And then the duties, I just aligned them with the charter, consult on the prudent investment of the town, because that's what the charter language said. Then just a minor edit on D. And then assist the staff with the procurement. The actual fiduciary duty is with the Board of Finance. It's not an oversight duty, it's a supervision and maintenance. So we actually do, to meet our fiduciary duty, probably have to be the ones to do the recruitment and approve the hiring of those. I don't think in practice much is going to change. We're going to have staff help and probably have representatives from the 3 boards if they so want to get involved in the actuarially. I know they will with the investment, so I don't think it will change on a practical matter or anything. And then in terms of what this means for our board, I think an easy way to allay there was some concern about the amount of time. I mean, Kevin and Derek do a fabulous job, and I think have done a great job representing our board, and they'll continue to do so. So this is sort of how I envision how it could work. So before each retirement subcommittee meeting, if the full board could get the material so that we just have a chance to review it. And if we have questions, we can send them to both Kevin or Derek to bring before the full board to get answers and report back to us. And then at our meetings, if the chair will just confirm that we received and reviewed, and we can add it to our minutes to show the public, so that we can just demonstrate the meeting of our fiduciary duty. But that's sort of a burden on you guys. Are you guys okay with that?
Well, I mean, I think, FIA usually hands out
Yeah.
the 2
Yes.
the 2 books. I think it'd be great if they, came with enough for everybody, but certainly the Board of Finance as well. It might make the meetings go a little more efficiently if we've already had a chance to, review the material.
They don't send those to you beforehand.
No,
right?
they
Yeah,
don't,
you
and
do.
so they might be
Do they?
No.
Yeah, electronically.
In advance,
Oh, okay.
Do it electronically,
bring
Yeah.
hard
except for
copies
those
to
that
the
need
meeting.
things printed.
Is it the same presentation? Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah, but
So it is.
It's a lot of information, and there's a responsibility on us to review it and ask the questions that, so that, I guess I'd like to try that. I think that's a good suggestion. So, anything
So,
else?
yeah, one more thing. So I did talk with both Paul Hinault and Nick Mason, who between them have probably over 36 years of experience on this. But I said, what's the history there? He goes, well, Lise, think about what's happening at the state level. This was, we don't want to be the state. So you want an oversight board separate from the board that's negotiating. Because if you get a bad board, and thank God we don't, we have two very good boards, but what happened at the state, they were negotiating and giving very high benefits
Union contracts
and not
you're talking
accounting
about.
for them in an appropriate manner. What happened to the poor teachers, the way they did that and didn't put money aside, or they were using the wrong pension assumption rate. And there's an inherent, you can understand how that could happen, because they have a pressure to keep their budgets low, and to go with the wrong assessment, or the wrong interest rate, or the wrong actuarial thing, might make sense to keep their budgets low. So it's a way, it's a natural check and balance, was the theory behind it. So it's a very good theory, I think. I think in practice, not much is going to change, other than the decisions need to come before our board for a formal approval.
Yeah, so I have one other comment that
Yeah.
we talked about, which was that, and I don't think that got in here, which is that each of the three boards will have designated members, but that it would be perfectly fine with me if those boards, if the designated member can't attend, that they can get a substitute who is also a member of that board. And I think it's especially important for us to try to have two people at these meetings every time.
So do we need to
Just so
say, or their designee?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, that's a great.
yeah. Do you want to add that in?
Can we just add that in now and then
Yeah.
actually adopt this
That would be
policy?
great. Oh, my God, in one meeting?
Like, multiple
Holy-
policies in one
Huh?
meeting. I'm in heaven.
You are.
This might be diving into the minutia, but in turn, because usually FIA will give a capital markets update, how much information do you want in terms of feedback as it relates to capital markets, or as it relates to the recommendations or discussions of what might affect the town?
So my expectation, and I'll ask Lisa what her expectation would be that to the extent that they highlighted, things that we should be concerned about, then those should be communicated to us. I went to some, I'm certain in 2008 and 2009, those meetings were very interesting in terms of the sky being falling. So we should be aware, and then that combined with the information that you receive from FIA should allow us to have a dialogue about it.
Right, because
But-
they
but-
will not make a recommendation, they just simply put the information
I know,
out
I've
there.
been- Yeah, so
Yeah.
you're right.
Oh, so I just have
For the
one.
benefit of everybody, yeah.
One point of discussion, I had recommended just taking out F, because the subcommittee doesn't need to assist with that. We can either just, when the chair does it, he can
F
request.
under what number?
Oh, I'm sorry,
Oh, yeah,
under
yeah,
4F.
Yep.
But if people wanted to leave it in, just do may be asked. But you could just eliminate it when we do it, you could ask, because I can't imagine that the full board is going to want to participate in all this. So I wanted to limit it. We usually just do one representative from each board, and I don't think we need 12 members on the board to pick advisors. Thankfully, we don't do it that often. But some of them, other than the investment, it may just be the Board of Finance wants to do it on time,
So
but I'm open to that.
we're required to put out an RFP every 5 years for the advisors?
We're not required, but it's good practice.
Yeah, do we do that? Do we do it?
I don't.
When was the last time we had
I
an
did,
RFP?
I did the RFP for FIA.
Yeah.
I don't remember when they were first hired, and I don't know if a second RFP went out. I was on the pension
So
board
I
when that happened.
don't think that needs to be the MOU, but I
Okay.
think we would ask Amy to sort of give us a feedback on when we last did that, and when would it be appropriate to do that.
Otherwise, I don't think we need to keep F. If it's more
Take it out
to,
altogether?
I mean, if
I'm
it's
fine
more
with
to kind of, again,
I think it's
Put an
self-evident
exclamation
that
point
we're the
on
ones
the
who.
fiduciary,
Yeah, we're the ones that hire.
And,
Yeah.
of course, part of our fiduciary duty is to consult with the key stakeholders. So for the investment person, certainly, I would think the chair would ask for a representative from the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education.
Okay,
So
so,
we're going to delete
Yeah,
F.
I agree.
you know, let's delete F, and then we get the motion here in just a minute. So I just would ask Maria and Amy, because you were instrumental in sort of drafting this MOU, and I think we should all recognize that this needs to be adopted at all three boards, and if it gets edited at each board, then it'll, you know, it might come back to
Circular
us,
reference.
but I think it'd be good for us to make the recommendation of the language that we're comfortable with, and that we would sign it in this form. If it materially changes, then we'll come back before we actually sign it. All right?
So we also need to decide about changing to D to finance rather than Board of Selectmen.
I agree with that change.
Did I
I
not
think
do
it
that?
should be.
Yeah.
Well, you said it was a,
Oh.
a discussion.
Yes.
So you think they should be they should be appointed by us?
Well, if
We're the
if
governing
we're,
body.
if we're the governing body, yeah.
It could be at the recommendation of the Board of Selectmen. It could be by the recommendation of anyone.
Yeah.
So the only thing
Well,
is
and my
we,
question too on that section was, do we need, I mean, if it's us, I feel comfortable that but do we need to say anything about what their qualifications should be? You know, some general statement that, you know, we're going to pick community members at large who have some experience or background in finance or economics or investments or something.
Well, the Board of Ed, and not to discredit anybody from the Board of Ed, but that's not their background.
No, I know.
No, the
And
members
that's
at
why if
large.
we're going to have
Yeah.
No, I understand.
community members at large, we at least ought to take the opportunity for the at-large members to have a cogent background.
Understood. I'll just, yeah.
I mean, we can leave it out because, if you want, I
What
can
what
live
Derek is
without
saying
it,
is
but.
it's not a qualification for the Board of Ed to have a finance
And I'm
background.
not suggesting that we put it in as a qualification for them, only under D, for the members at large, the ones that we're picking from the community.
Right.
Let's make sure we're picking people who have, you know, I mean, the others were by virtue of our participation in a committee, but these are just, you know, random people, and do we want to make sure they're not random?
I'm going to avoid
Speak, it's
comment
fine.
on that.
Well, all right, so I'm going to just throw this out for what it's worth. I mean, in other places where members of elected boards are replaced, they're recommended and then approved by the Board of Selectmen. Is that at all applicable here?
so no, because it's our subcommittee.
Okay.
If it was
Fair enough.
it was a co-equal
Okay.
board, that would be the case. But
Okay.
this is actually a subcommittee of the Board of Finance because we hold the fiduciary duty.
Well, okay, but now I'm going to, so the other point I would make is that it is a subcommittee of us, but it's not, it's more than that, because it's a communication vehicle for the Board of Ed and the Board of Selectmen, whose employees are beneficiaries of this, and you might say that the two non-board members, community members at large represent the taxpayers at large, in which case
Could be anybody.
it could it be anybody, and it wouldn't necessarily be our responsibility to support them. I'm just trying to be,
So I think that's a reasonable point to make as well. I don't have a strong, because I trust the Board of Selectmen or this board to pick appropriate people.
I
They've done a
agree.
good job in the past,
I
so to me, it's not as important. And it, you know, we can do it as an appointed board by the Board of Selectmen because there is a duty to consult, so maybe it is an official board if you want to treat it that way. But I just want to make the point that only we can delegate the duty. Other people can't take the duty. It's not an option for
that-
anyone.
that
We have
should
to
not-
follow the
yeah,
charter.
based on this memorandum, that should not
Yeah.
happen, cannot happen. So what you're saying is that they could end up making a recommendation to become independent of the Board of Finance. But that decision, that recommendation would be voted down by the Board of Finance, and so.
Well, I mean, they could do that and still fill their
Put the
consulting
money in
thing.
Bitcoin? Is that what you're suggesting?
No, but what I am suggesting is they can't take on the fiduciary duty because that is assigned by the charter.
Understood.
So that's
So what
all.
you're saying is that there's
Some changes they can make
there
that
are
they're
8 members
entitled to.
on this committee,
Yeah,
and if they all 8 showed up, the Board of Finance representatives could be outvoted on the recommendation that they made,
which is fine,
which would be
Okay.
fine.
yes,
But then we would take all of that under advisement
right.
and make our decision upon which action would actually be taken.
Right.
I mean, do we go so far as saying they have to meet with the subcommittee before, and getting a recommendation from the subcommittee?
Yeah.
Before before we make the decision? There should be an interview with the subcommittee.
Who does?
I don't know if it has to be the
I'm saying
subcommittee
it
in its
falls under,
entirety.
I'm saying this should be Board of Finance. However, I think anybody at large should have to meet with the subcommittee prior to, or a group,
In
a subcommittee
consultation.
of the subcommittee to
I mean, you
interview.
could have a member from each of the boards pick the at-large if you
Yeah,
wanted.
yeah.
That might be the thing.
Couldn't we just say recommended by the Board of Selectmen and approved by the Board of Finance?
That would work.
would
That
be
works for
fine.
me.
Yeah.
That's the Prell compromise.
Yes, very good.
Excellent.
Value add.
Okay, so I'm with Linda, I would like very much to adopt our version of this tonight. So
do it.
can we highlight any other changes? Okay. So the edits so first of all, we're going to make a motion to,
We're going to make a motion to approve
The
what Amy
memorandum-
handed out.
yeah, memorandum of
Following.
understanding as presented in its edited form with the following additional edits, which would be to delete section, what is that?
4F.
4F. And to insert the words,
So section 2D
in 2D,
would read, "Two community members at large whom are electors of the town, recommended by the Board of Selectmen and approved by the Board of Finance."
perfect.
And there's one other
Was there
change.
one other change? What was that?
In section 1, membership, what you wanted, that two members of this would apply to each
Oh,
of
yeah,
the
yeah,
three
okay.
boards, two members of the board of whatever appointed by that board, or their designees if they are unable to attend a particular meeting.
I like that.
Okay.
Did you get
So
that?
for A, B, and C. And I can give
Give these to Lori.
to Lori.
Yeah. Okay. Maria?
I would, if I could just make a suggestion that Bob was involved in reviewing this particular draft, and I think just for consistency with charter, it might be worthwhile to have him take a look at this. Take a look at this with the proposed changes. So the motion that we have prepared for you suggested sending the proposed draft memorandum of understanding regarding the retirement plan subcommittee to the Board of Selectmen, Board of Education, and the retirement plan subcommittee for review and comment. There may be some value before sort of saying this is the final version to at least send a referral to those boards and say, here's our draft. This is what we're comfortable with. Could you supply a little bit of, comment, feedback, just in
Fair
case
enough.
there's something maybe
I
that.
agree.
Or adopted and sent it.
Exactly, and that also gives us an opportunity just to send this draft back to Bob before it's sort of presented as a final draft. So that would just be my suggestion, is that we send it to
Yep.
Bob, we send it to the boards for referral before you finalize it.
Yeah.
But we're not
so-
looking for
Well,
comment.
so I think we want to indicate that we're willing to sign this memorandum of understanding as we have amended it from the original draft. Isn't that what we're saying?
Upon council's review and approval.
Yes, yeah, I agree with that. Just, yeah.
Don't,
I think if
we're
we-
in charge of the subcommittee,
I
right?
think we
So
can
Yeah, I think we
send it
should
out.
have to approve
I
it, and we
I
can
think we'll
say-
adopt it.
As long as they're.
We should
okay.
ask,
So I've got a comment then, because I
Yeah.
didn't anticipate that, based on the time of your, most of your policies take at least one.
Years.
Be a great deal of urgency.
When Maria put this together, one of the conversations, we had a quick back and forth about, there's reference to the Board of Ed 403B plans. That has never been discussed or part of, our board has never heard about that being something.
Where is that?
right at the very beginning.
First, it's in the first line. of the description, and it's similar, frankly, to the 457 plans that the town offers. Those two are very similar because they are totally employee-funded. And to say that you're, worrying about the management and the actuarially defined contribution, it just, I can see how someone would read the charter more broadly, but its focus has been on the OPEB and pension funds that have taxpayer dollars that you're worried about the actuarially defined contribution. These two, while the 457s have been reviewed by FIA, we added that in 2013 because we were using FIA beginning in roughly 2010, 11, I'm going to guess. Because this all started with the financial crisis, because I sat on the pension group when Kevin Kane led it, and I went to every one of those meetings along with Paul and Kevin and Nick Mason and others. And at that point, it was like, wow, we really need to have an independent advisor because Russell was the prior one and they sold the funds. They were the advisor kind of, and they were selling, they were buying the funds from them. So FIA, Tom Cook led that process, and I, worked with others, and I guess Lisa, you were part of that, and we had, that's when FIA was chosen first to do pension, and then I believe OPEB, and then we added the 457 plan. So that's where the subcommittee, which was born out of sort of this practical solution of giving everybody involvement, came later. So I personally think we have to assess whether or not that really is what the charter is talking about in terms of.
Yeah.
So you may
So
want to
just
leave
this
out
purpose.
So just-
457.
so there are-
457 and 403B are kind of a different animal.
Yeah.
There are no town funds in those,
Right.
and each individual participant makes their own investment choice.
Exactly.
So they shouldn't be here.
But it's,
But
but
we
the
do look at the
choices are
structure
limited,
And the education,
right.
and we do
Well,
talk about this at this.
yeah, because we have a 401K where the trustee is responsible for providing the choice of investments, so.
And
that-
we are.
Do we play that role?
So that's the question for Bob. I think that's an appropriate question for Bob. We are the budget authority for the town of Simsbury, so it technically falls under that, I would think, but there may be, I'm open to that discussion with Bob. I would like Bob's counsel on that. One, is it under our duty and is it our obligation or is it an option? So that
Because if
sounds
there was a
appropriate.
change, who would be responsible for
Right.
making that decision, right? If they were changing one record keeper for another
Mm-hmm.
record keeper, then where does that responsibility lie?
It lies with the fiduciary, so the question is, who is the fiduciary for those plans?
Who's the trustee?
Because
Is that,
ultimately, well-
is that money in a trust?
Ultimately, we pay
The 457 or the 403B?
I don't believe it's a
Who's the
trust.
trustee, who's the administrator, who has the responsibility? So we don't know that. Nobody knows the answer to that.
So I think we definitely need Bob's opinion on that, just to get some clarification.
I understand your concern about it, but I think there are responsibilities for plans that are offered through organizations that somebody has to be responsible to give oversee the designation of the funds that the money can be invested in.
Because they really fall under ERISA.
Right.
They're non-ERISA plans.
That's similar too.
And the 403B, I'm the plan administrator for, and I can tell you, it is a nightmare because we have 16 approved vendors.
Right.
No third-party admin. So I would have to ask Dave Holden, like, when and how that started, because that all predated me. I inherited that, and when we
Yeah.
updated the plan document, I think it was 2011 was the last one, but it is a non-ERISA plan. So it's not that I love doing this, I just know that our Board of Ed has never seen this topic come up, and it really just came through our conversation of, oh, do you have one? I said, yes. I didn't know we were going to change the potential way that
Well,
that we
this
structured them.
certainly wasn't an end run to try to take
No,
over
it
something we
wasn't.
don't
I
want to do.
understand, it was
Yeah,
totally
got it.
based on our,
Yeah,
just
yeah,
trying
yeah.
to be complete with a description of, here's everything we have.
So that's a topic
Well-
that should definitely be reviewed because.
Can we adopt it as we've discussed and make it
I
very
just didn't
clear?
want you
we're
to be
also
surprised later that
asking
if there
for-
was a question on this,
for
I felt like
input,
now this
yeah.
was my only opportunity.
And then
Yeah,
forward
I-
it to
I-
the two
Raise it
boards.
before we get
I still would
further
like to
advice.
do as Linda suggests, which is adopt this. To the extent that there is an issue around it, we will revisit.
I just wanted to
And I
raise
think
that
it's-
concern, that's why.
But to Lisa's point, we're seeking.
Yeah, and
guidance.
ask Bob's opinion on that.
Right.
Yeah.
Do we want to seek Bob's opinion first and adopt it at the next meeting?
Yeah, I would,
Either way.
All right,
Let's go about it the right, I mean, otherwise, what are we doing? Are we amending, or are we,
Can we just try to
are
get
we
things done?
amending, are we reopening, or are we then making a motion?
Well, this is
we-
the
all
first
right.
Just as
time,
we made a little change
Let-
earlier to,
Yeah.
if you don't adopt it, you leave it open for all kinds of stuff to come back. That's my only
well,
concern.
the only thing I
Yeah,
want to.
that's fair, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, we do need to clarify that if there's a change, it should
We're
come
not really
before the-
looking for massive
well,
amounts of change here.
No, I would hope not, because we have very
Yeah, so
functioning.
I'm on that page. I think we should adopt it as we've amended it. We should seek Bob's counsel and then refer it to the other two boards for their review of our approved and adopted.
So moved.
So moved by Mr. Prowl,
Seconded.
seconded by Ms. Schofield. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye,
And I'll go with aye.
we're on the same page.
I would have followed you.
We'll get it, we'll get it figured out.
Lori, do you need a copy of this, or Amy, to,
I c-
you've got all of the
My only
changes we talked
observation
about?
is that we don't-
To change policy a lot.
Yes, we're accepting
Since
all,
it
we're
gets out
accepting
there,
all of
and
those
there's
changes and
multiple.
making a couple more.
I would love
Why
to
don't you
have
get them
Yeah.
from Linda?
I'll get it.
Yeah.
Did you say
Oh,
she
yeah.
abstained?
Oh, and mention that
More?
Ms. Wertheimer stepped out of the meeting at 6:45 and abstained on this item.
No vote.
So if you can communicate that we are open to amendments if there's major,
Exactly.
if we miss something
From council,
from council,
From council.
yeah.
nobody else.
Well, there may be something we've missed or didn't think about. I think we do want to be open to.
Well, that's why I asked for Maria and Amy's input, because I think we are asserting our responsibility here, but we don't want to get people's nose out of joint about this either, because the people that have been serving on this committee doing, great job and working in everybody's best interest. This is not, we're just taking the responsibility we've always had. All right?
And so I have one related question, not on that MOU, but we did have a whole policy that we were working on last month on this topic of defined benefit plans, investment policy statement, that we proposed some changes to last time, and it didn't come back. What came back was an MOU instead, but the MOU only covers one tiny bit.
I think
Of what's
once
in
the
that.
MOU is adopted by all three boards, then we can finalize the policy.
Okay, because that's my impression, is that the MOU covers Roman numeral 3, at least for me. Everything else on the policy was fine. So once we've got the MOU, then we can adopt the policy. Okay, we'll just make whatever changes we need to in Roman numeral 3 and move on. Okay, terrific, thanks.
We're moving towards policy heaven.
Oh, I just love it. I like things to be
Okay.
documented.
All right, so moving on then to agenda item number 9, communications, proposed revised debt policy.
So may I just interject here and give an update from the subcommittee?
yes. Oh,
you certainly may.
That would be great.
So it will be an agenda item quarterly.
Right, exactly. So FIA came in and gave a quarterly update. They kind of mentioned, which everybody is probably familiar with, that the fourth quarter was kind of challenging from a market perspective. They also noted that January had some type of rebound that took place. They also reiterated, they noted that the median interest rate assumption for statewide is around 7%. So we've been talking a little bit about that, and the trend is moving toward interest rates assumptions lower than 7. And I think it's still up on the table for discussion as far as what we move our interest rate assumption to. Correct me if I'm wrong, we're talking 6.5.
I think we gave 6.5% guidance at our tri-board meeting.
Yeah.
Wanted two scenarios, one was 6.75 and then one was 6.5.
6.5 was about a $500,000 hit to the budget, if I recall, right?
We had a discussion about active versus passive management, meaning exchange-traded funds, which are passive investments versus actively managed funds. Then we went on to review, one of the troubling funds was International Fund, Aberdeen Investments. They kind of talked about their divergence from the average, or from the indexes. And then a motion was made, obviously not in accordance with the
New policy.
policy.
The
Well, I don't know about the old policy, so,
No, I think it was I mean, you were acting in good faith, absolutely.
so a motion was made to remove Aberdeen and put in Vanguard for their international part of the sleeve. The other thing that was discussed was the defined contribution plan, fourth quarter. I'm going to summarize, so correct me if I'm wrong, so you guys know, is that they basically have a stable value fund, which gives them about 4%, which MetLife or Mass Mutual turns around and charges us the additional funds to keep that interest rate above average. What we requested from FIA is a request for information for record-keeping services for evaluating alternative record keepers. Basically, people who are in a stable value fund are being subsidized by the folks that are not in the stable value fund. It's above market rate.
Okay.
So I would assume then in the future, if there was to be some type of investment change, we first have to present the information to the Board of Finance and then have the board vote on that investment decision.
Right. Do you want us to ratify the decision you made? Is that necessary?
Would that be appropriate?
I think it would be appropriate, given Bob's language of the charter.
Yeah. So to be consistent with our understanding of our responsibility?
Should someone go get Maura? Is she? did she
She's
leave?
on a phone call.
Oh, I thought she was recusing herself.
No,
Okay.
no, no.
From something
She said,
previously.
no, she told me she had a conflict and would have to step out. So, I think the motion should come from
Kevin?
our representative.
Right, so there was a motion, the motion to be made is to instruct FIA to remove Aberdeen investment and to replace it with Vanguard investments.
And you're requesting a motion to ratify by the Board of Finance.
So,
Is the recommendation, yeah, so you could do it that way, or you could say it was the recommendation of the subcommittee that we make this change. And then from our board, this is the way I would envision this. One of our members would say, I move that we accept the recommendation of the subcommittee.
Maria?
No, yes?
In the future, yes, but since the subcommittee was
Fine,
acting
great.
sort of
Okay,
under the
got
old
it, got it,
premise.
got it, got it.
Yeah,
All
I would
right,
say
so-
ratify for tonight.
So for this time, we will ratify as moved by Mr. Prowl and seconded by Mr. Peterson. Discussion?
Thank you.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Passed. 3. Good job. Okay, anything?
that completes my update.
Thank you very much.
So it is, I mean, I know this is kind of crazy, but it is actually very interesting stuff. I actually agree with you.
Yeah.
So is watching paint dry.
Oh, you are so mean.
Okay, proposed revised debt policy.
So, just a small correction on this. This is actually a rough draft. I would just click happy because we had the policies on the top. It is not a proposed revised, it's just a rough draft that Lisa was kind enough to come up with. She gave it to me. There's some feedback, some questions in here that I would like to do some additional research and review on. But due to the current budget season, I have not had the time to do so. So I wanted you all to at least see what Lisa was able to
Right.
put together and send over any suggestions. And then at the March meeting, I'll come up with a proposed revised for you all to review.
So, yeah, and I.
So you want us to email you with suggestions?
Would be great. Again, thanks to Lisa for taking the lead here. A lot of this was creatively researched from other towns' debt
Yes.
policies.
I can't take a lot of credit for the
Yeah.
verbiage. I took most of it from,
But I think
at the end,
putting
you
those
see where I
together
took it
is
from.
Tremendous amount of
artwork in and of
Yeah,
itself.
yeah.
I took it from.
It was not intended we would discuss any of this tonight, except to have it in our hands so that we can all
Yes, I fell
familiarize
from here.
ourselves with it, provide comments, so that we can try to get this down to 3 or 4 meetings before we adopt it.
Or we'll just-
I'm thrilled to see movement on this, and so
Yeah.
thank you very
Yeah,
much,
this
because
is
this
very
is the
important one,
oldest
yeah.
policy and the most
Yeah.
outdated policy that we have.
Yeah.
So we really are overdue for doing this one.
And there are, I just as you do it, I tried to highlight some key areas of like decision points for us, and some I took guesses at, so don't, to the extent I put in a number, like the 500,000 you'll see in there, that was, another town had 1 million, I thought that was too high based on past practice, but it's not a recommendation. It was just a placeholder, so view all these as points of discussion, not necessarily my recommendation.
And then we've already discussed the tax abatement for volunteer firemen and ambulance personnel. No action is required. But appreciate the fire chief's information. And then the last thing I have, which we've already touched on too, is just for all of us to pay attention. The governor's budget will be proposed tomorrow. And I think it's our job to pay attention, watch, listen to the feedback. I think the challenge for us this year is the same as it is every year.
Like every year.
But that I think we've at least got on record as saying that we're going to move ahead full speed on our budgeting process based on what we know when we know it and do the best we can. But it does seem, because it's highly likely that the clarity on where the legislature will end up and the governor on a final budget will be late, maybe after our process is complete. And so, rather than wait and then try to do something with still imperfect information, we're gonna move ahead on what we know. And
The other thing I would just add is, as we get the runs from cost and CCM by town, in the past, it's been helpful, but they've often been wrong as to the specifics, so as we get them, just keep in mind, we'll rely on Amy for the real numbers as
so
they're
the car tax
evaluated.
thing is big, anything that they do with ECS is huge, and anything that they might frighteningly do with school teachers' pensions is enormous. So those are the topics. On the margin, everything else will be impactful, but we should be able to move around. All right? And with that,
I move we adjourn.
moved by Ms. Schofield, seconded by
Kevin?
Kevin Prell. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Great, good meeting, thanks.